To go deeper on this one, huh? This deep dive is going to be a big one. The crucifixion. We're going beyond the familiar story here, folks,
Yeah.
to try to uncover those less discussed aspects, get into the historical context, and see why this event still makes waves today. Gotta admit, even for a deep dive, this one's got some weight to it.
Yeah, it's one of those moments in history that just keeps on fascinating and challenging us, So we're going to unpack what our source tells us. Really going to try to get into those nuances, those different ways of interpreting what happened.
Right on. Now, listeners already know crucifixion, huge deal in Christian history. But we're going deeper, right?
Yeah.
Beyond that surface level. And our source, they start by painting a picture of Jesus before everything went down, before the whole crucifixion thing. And it's interesting they're saying he wasn't just some carpenter. He was a teacher, gaining influence. So what was it about his message that drew people in? And maybe even more importantly, why was it so threatening?
Well, his teachings were, about love and compassion, and that was seriously disruptive back then. Think about it. You've got a society, it's all built on strict hierarchies, and suddenly this guy shows up preaching about forgiveness, about loving your enemies. Whoa, that turns things upside down. This wasn't just about, how to be a good person. It was challenging the whole system, even Roman power, their authority.
And that explains why some people wanted him gone. Which leads us to, Judas, the betrayal. Our source says he was paid 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces. Could you imagine betraying someone, let alone someone you thought was a mentor, a friend, for any amount of money?
Yeah, trying to put a modern price tag on that it's tricky to say the least. But some scholars, they figure it'd be like several months' worth of wages, Maybe even a whole year's worth for a laborer back then. Just to give you some perspective, imagine selling out someone you knew, someone you respected, for a year's salary. Makes you think about Judas's motives, right? Was it just greed, desperation, or was there something else going on there?
And talk about a timeless question, huh? The value of loyalty, the cost of betrayal, it's something people have grappled with forever. But here's something else that's interesting. Our source makes a point of saying that Jesus didn't really resist when he was arrested, almost like he knew it was going to happen.
It's like that idea of fate, Destiny. It's a concept that pops up all over the place throughout history, across different cultures and beliefs. Whether it was actually destiny or just him accepting what he felt he had to do, it adds another dimension to how we see his actions.
Right. And then there were the trials. But even with those, it's like his accusers, they were really reaching for stuff, weren't they? Like they couldn't quite find solid ground to actually condemn him.
That's what's so interesting, right? The source really points out how weak the accusations actually were. You'd think if they were going after a real criminal, they would come up with something more convincing. Makes you think the reasons behind the crucifixion, they went a lot deeper than just following the law. What if it was more about making an example out of Jesus? A warning to anyone else thinking about rocking the boat.
Ooh, yeah. Definitely giving out some serious power struggle vibes, maintain control kind of thing. Scary how relevant that still feels, even today. But we've got to talk about how brutal this all was, because our source, they don't hold back when it comes to the actual crucifixion.
And it's important to understand this wasn't just an execution, right? This was meant to be a whole production of suffering. The Romans, they knew how to put on a show. And the source, they described the scourging, and let me tell you, it's graphic.
I mean, the scourging alone, we're not talking about a slap on the wrist here. This was torture. And then on top of that, imagine the agony of carrying the cross after that beating.
See, the Romans, they were all about symbolism. Crucifixion, it wasn't just about death. It was about humiliation, about breaking someone publicly. Can you imagine what message that sent to anyone who saw it?
Oh, absolutely. It was like they were saying, this is what happens to those who challenge Rome.
Yeah, no kidding. It was a message designed to shut down any kind of rebellion, make people think twice before they even considered challenging those in charge. But here's the thing. Even while he was facing this horrible death, the source points out something amazing about Jesus's response at Golgotha, his prayer. He forgave the people who were killing him.
Right. That whole Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's just, wow, to have that much compassion in that moment. It seems impossible, doesn't it? Like it goes against every natural instinct. So what's your take on that, on his willingness to forgive while he's suffering like that?
Well, to me, it gets at the very heart of what he was teaching, that radical kind of love that goes beyond even the worst situations. And it wasn't just him passively accepting what was happening, It was a powerful statement, like he was trying to break that cycle of hatred and violence right there on the cross.
And it's almost like as if in response to that incredible act of forgiveness, so the source goes on to describe all these crazy events happening, like darkness in the middle of the day, earthquakes, and this one gets me, the temple veil tearing. It's almost like the universe itself was reacting to Jesus' death. Can you unpack that a little? What's the significance of all that?
Definitely. I mean, people have interpreted those events in a lot of different ways. But let's take the temple veil, for instance. Now, you probably know in Jewish tradition, that veil, it separated the most sacred part of the temple, the Holy of Holies, from everyone else. Only the high priest was allowed in there, and only once a year. So the veil, it was this physical barrier, but also this symbolic one between humanity and the divine. And when it was torn during the crucifixion, well, some people see that as a really powerful image, like that barrier between us and God was being broken down.
It does make you wonder, right? Like, were those events around his death just things that happened in the physical world? Or were they something more, maybe like symbolic expressions of something bigger, something spiritual that was happening at the same time?
That's a question that's kept theologians and scholars busy for centuries. But hey, while we're talking about powerful moments, let's talk about Jesus's last words as recorded in the source. It is finished. And here's the key. The source emphasizes this wasn't some kind of defeated sigh. It was a victory cry. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like he wasn't just giving up. He was saying he had accomplished something. But what was it? Was it just the act of dying on the cross, that sacrifice to, as some believe, atone for humanity's sins? Or was there something more he achieved? Something about the way he lived, the message he embodied, that still resonates with people today?
Now you're asking the big questions. The source seems to be suggesting that his death wasn't the ending, but rather a beginning. Like it closed one chapter and started a whole new one. But before we get too deep into the theological weeds here, there's this detail in the source I found really insightful: the centurion's reaction to Jesus' death.
Oh, right. He's all, surely this man was the Son of God, which is a pretty big statement, especially coming from someone who, from what we can tell, wasn't really into the whole religious side of things. He wasn't a follower or anything, but even he could tell that something huge had just happened. What do you think that says about the impact of Jesus' life and death? I mean, it affected people who didn't even subscribe to his teachings.
Exactly. It makes you think about those moments in history, right? Where someone sacrifices so much and lives with such conviction that it goes beyond any one culture or religion. It's like even those who were just watching, like the centurion, could sense the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just some random guy dying. It was something more.
It's wild to think about, It's like the impact of his death, of his message, it just keeps echoing out through history.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the power of ideas, right? How they can outlive us, how they can transcend their time.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the lasting impact of the crucifixion, which, as our source points out, is every bit as relevant today as it was back then.
So what is it about this event, about Jesus' life and death? Why does it still resonate so strongly with people across different cultures and everything?
Well, think about the concepts that this event has come to represent: sacrifice, forgiveness, love conquering all. I mean, those are universal themes, right? They speak to something deep within us, something about the human experience, what we long for, what we hope for. Even if you don't buy into the religious aspect of it, those ideas, they still hold a lot of power.
Yeah, you don't have to be a theologian or anything to feel the way of those concepts. It makes you really examine your own life, doesn't it? Your values, how you treat people, how you deal with all the messy stuff life throws at you.
Exactly. The source really drives home this point. The crucifixion, it's not just some event from the past, it's an idea, a story that continues to shape how we think, what we believe. It forces us to confront these huge questions about faith, about justice, about the meaning of life itself.
I've got to say, this whole deep dive has really given me a lot to chew on. We started with the historical context, got into the brutality of it all, talked about the symbolism behind the crucifixion, and we see how much his life and death still impact people today. But it feels like we're walking away with more questions than answers, doesn't it? Like you were saying before, what was his mission?
And sometimes that's the best part, right? The questions that linger. This deep dive, it wasn't about giving you all the answers neatly tied up with a bow. It was about giving you the tools to explore these questions for yourself. Maybe his mission, his message, it continues to unfold through each of us as we wrestle with these ideas and try to live lives that have meaning.
Almost like this deep dive. It was a kind of journey in itself, wasn't it? We started somewhere familiar, but we ended up in some pretty unexpected places. And in the end, we have even more questions.
And those questions, those mysteries, those are the things that keep us engaged, keep us searching, keep us open to new possibilities. They challenge us to keep digging deeper, keep exploring, keep trying to understand ourselves and the world around us a little better.
So to everyone listening out there, we'll leave you with this. What will your deep dive be? What questions will you choose to explore? And what will you discover along the way?